Good evening, and welcome to the Technical Assistance Grant webinar hosted by the Department of Toxic Substance Control. I am your opening host, Tracy Fuerte, Public Participation Manager with DTSC. This webinar is for residents, 501c3, nonprofit organizations, and community advocates and organizations that would like to serve those impacted by environmental issues in their communities as a technical advisor. The TAG program provides vulnerable communities an opportunity to actively participate in the oversight of environmental cleanup activities that affect them. We'll go ahead and give it a few moments just so individuals have the opportunity to log on. We'll give it till about 6:02 and then we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. Again, thank you for joining us. Some of our meeting guidelines for today. By participating in this meeting, you understand that this meeting is being recorded. You may be muted for background noise. The chat feature will be used for DTSC informational purposes and any questions or comments. And following the presentation, your questions and comments will be addressed. Next slide, please. Simultaneous audio interpretation is available through Zoom. You may click on the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen or look for 3 dots on the Zoom app to select your language. It is important that everyone selects a language. If you are calling by phone only and would like a Spanish audio interpretation, please call 877-917-6178 and enter code 418-0779#. Spanish translated presentation slides will be available on the meeting announcement on TAG website. Automated closed captions have been enabled. You can turn them off by clicking the CC icon or moving the captions box. Next slide, please. Before we review our agenda, we'd like to know who's joining us today via a quick poll. So we can go ahead and pull up the poll on the screen, please. So on our participant poll, we'd like to get an idea of who is attending the webinar. So if you could just select the option that best describes you. Are you a community resident or a member of a community group, a member of a group, a 501c3 or organization under fiscal sponsorship, technical assistance advisor, a private corporation, or none of the above? So it looks like we have a good mix of individuals that are attending this webinar. We have a few community members, a member of a tribe, 501(c), some technical advisors, and some that are just none of the above. So thank you for sharing those results. We'll go ahead and move on with our agenda. So in this webinar, we're going to go ahead and go over our introduction of who the Department of Toxic Substance Control is and the Cleanup in Vulnerable Communities Initiative Program. We will provide an overview of the Technical Assistance Grant, also known as TAG. We will review eligibility requirements, and we will also go over allowable activities, next steps, and questions and answers. So let's go ahead and get into this webinar and by introducing our speaker, Ed Moreland, an environmental program manager with DTSC. Take it away.
Thank you, Tracy. Well, good evening to everybody. And I just wanted to start off by thank you so much for joining us tonight and expending part of your evening with us to find out more about the Technical Assistance Program, or as we'll be talking about it throughout the night, TAG program. I just wanted to start off by saying I just want to tell you how excited I am tonight about having the ability to share with you the information about DTSC's brand new TAG program. And once again, thank you for joining us. So I'm Ed Moreland. I'm a branch chief for the Department of Toxic Substances Control, and as well as the program lead for the development of the TAG program. So what I'd like to start off today is by explaining who we are at DTSC for those of you that are new to our department or dealing with our department. Then I'll follow that by talking about the funding source for the TAG program, which is the Cleanup in Vulnerable Communities Initiative, or CVCI, the source of funding for us. And then lastly, I will talk about the initiation of the TAG program in terms of what it is. And I'll speak in terms of kind of the high level aspects of TAG. And then I'll be turning over the discussion to my colleagues at DTSC to talk in more depth about the various aspects of the program itself. So next slide, please. So first of all, what is DTSC? DTSC is part of the California Environmental Protection Agency, and as the Environmental Protection Agency is what we do specifically is we deal with hazardous waste in the state of California, and we deal with it from multiple perspectives. First of all, is how to handle hazardous waste. Our folks in the department regulate the handling and transport of hazardous waste. If that hazardous waste has gotten into the environment, into the soil, or into the groundwater, we oversee and regulate the cleanup of that contamination or that contaminated hazardous waste. And lastly, we have a branch of the department that deals to make sure that it doesn't get into the environment in the first place, or it doesn't get into our products in terms of things like our commercial products, our health, our beauty products, things like that. So we try to keep it from getting kind of into the commercial stream in the first place. So that's what DTSC is all about. Next slide, please. So as part of DTSC, what is the funding source for us at DTSC? It's Cleanup in Vulnerable Communities Initiative, or CVCI. We go to the next slide, please. So what is CVCI? CVCI is based in a Senate Bill 158, that was signed by Governor Newsom back in 2021. And CVCI in its entirety has $500 million to be able to address the issues that environmental justice and contamination has impacted in vulnerable communities. And that 500, what you see in this pie diagram next to you to the discussion, is how that money is broken out. The TAG program is a small component of that program to be able to effectively communicate what we do with the communities. We have a total of $2.5 million over a period of 4 years to be able to give that money out as grants to the communities. The bulk of the money within CVCI deals with the actual cleanup of those brownfield type sites within those vulnerable communities. And they're all in the form of either grants, brownfield grants to clean up those communities, or it's called discovery and enforcement. And that means that DTSC itself will go out and investigate potential impacted sites Primarily at this stage, they're dry cleaning type sites to see if they are impacting the environment. And if they are, we will pursue the responsible parties to do the cleanup on those sites. If responsible parties are not found to do that, then the state of California, via our authority, will actually implement the cleanup on behalf of that community. Next slide, please. So now let's get into the discussion of what the TAG program, the Technical Assistance Grant Program, is all about. So let's first have, I'll read through that first bullet, the dry first bullet, in terms of technically the definition of the TAG program. It's a grant program to provide vulnerable communities with professional and scientific resources to engage and advocate for community needs, environmental cleanups. That's it. Like I said, that's a lot of pretty formal language there. But let's talk about what it really constitutes. Principally, it constitutes giving vulnerable communities the ability to hire technical advisor, and that is a person that serves effectively as a liaison between the community and the DTSC with regard to our cleanup process itself. So what does that technical advisor do? The key definition there really is the technical advisor will translate complicated, complex technical and scientific information into terms that are understandable to a person that does not have that technical or scientific background. And we'll talk a little bit more about what those responsibilities of the technical advisor are in a subsequent discussion tonight. So technical advisor is kind of the core of the program, but there's additional aspects of our TAG program that differs from other TAG programs that are out there, say, for instance, that are sponsored by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the federal TAG program. And what that involves is the monies will be available through our TAG program to perform community science activities. That is to provide funds for communities to come up with their own scientific process to be able to evaluate kind of what's going on in their neighborhoods with regard to that related, we call them response action sites, or it's more commonly termed cleanup sites. In addition to community science funding, there's an element called confirmation sampling. And we'll explain a little bit more about both of those activities here in subsequent slides. The confirmation sampling involves just making sure that what's happening at that site is actually benefiting kind of the environmental cleanup process, mainly that the chemicals are being cleaned up as they should, and that contamination as the cleanup is being performed is not traveling off of the site itself. So with that, I'm going to ask my colleagues to be able to provide some more information and direct definitions of some of the things I've just talked about. But one thing to point out is you see as kind of a footnote to this slide about the technical advisor and the technical advisor program. And as the footnote says, this is a reimbursement-based grant program with an option for advance payment. And we'll be talking about what that means. So here shortly. So just want to point that out and kind of hold on to that for a minute. So at this point, I'm going to turn the discussion over to my colleague, Dr. Deborah Taylor, who's going to go more into the discussion of technical advisors. So Deborah, over to you.
Thank you, Ed. So let's talk a little bit more about what a technical advisor is and some of the qualities that we want to see in a technical advisor. Basically, a technical advisor has the technical expertise, the skill, and the ability to understand environmental data and to communicate that information to the community. It's a person who meets the qualifications to provide the grantee read community organization is the grantee, with an unbiased, independent review of cleanup site-related information. So you really want someone who is a good communicator, who understands what's going on, and can explain it in language that everybody can understand. The technical advisor should have education, training, and experience in a relevant scientific field. And please note that the technical advisor is chosen by the grantee. DTSC does not assign or recommend or in any way influence the choice of technical advisor beyond basic qualifications. And those activities of the advisor will be directed by the grantee, which is the community organization. Next slide, please. So, what can I do with tag funds once I get them? Basically, the tag funds are meant to hire an independent technical advisor. And what does that person do? They interpret and explain complex environmental reports or data, and they meet with the community to discuss the site. So to discuss the data, and they discuss the cleanup plan and explain what's going on and educate the community. They also can lead environmental science, community environmental science. So those are projects that the community might want to engage in. It could be some type of basic research around their community or whatever they decide they want to do. And it can also involve conducting community confirmation sampling. So let's talk a little bit about community science. So the definition of community science is scientific work undertaken by the members of the general public in collaboration with or under the direction of professional scientists. Now, this collaboration provides opportunity for the community to ask their own questions. The more information we get and the more understanding we get, we can begin to ask questions relative to the site. It also provides them an opportunity to participate in community confirmation sampling, perimeter site tours, for example, and laboratory tours. All of this is up to that community to decide what they want to, what activities they want to engage in. Also, they can learn about sampling through tutorials, for example. And all of this process is to empower that community to advocate for themselves. Next slide, please. What kind of sampling can a technical advisor do? So, community confirmation sampling is at its basis designed to ensure that any site-related contamination has not migrated beyond the cleanup site boundary, and to confirm that the site has been characterized properly and that the boundaries are adequately specified or delineated, and that it has been cleaned up to applicable cleanup levels. Now, those specific samples can be collected by the TA, if we're talking about perimeter sampling, or it can be collected by the responsible party's consultant or DTSC staff as split samples. And those would be happening at the time of working on the project and also directed by the community. So the community gets to choose and interact and have some say in how they are collecting some information. Next slide, please. So what else can I do with tag funds besides hiring the technical advisor? So we realized that there are other activities that the grantee would need to perform. Now, those those things we consider kind of general operational costs, and they should not exceed 20% of the total grant amount. They might include activities such as grant planning, procurement, website development, grant administration, and reporting. And of course, this is a government grant, so there is reporting. We have to account for what we do. Next slide, please. Now, here's the most important part that I'm sure you're interested in, and that is, how does the community benefit from this program? So, a better understanding of technical reports can empower the community to influence the cleanup process and be active participants in the investigation and cleanup of contaminated sites in their communities. So some of the reports that the technical advisor would be involved in interpreting and communicating would be sampling work plans and reports, for example, feasibility studies, cleanup plans, risk assessments, remedy completion reports, and operation and maintenance reports. So all of these are functions that the technical advisor can be involved in, and really depending upon what it is the community wants to know and how they want to direct their time. So now that we've gotten some information about what the technical advisor is and does, and it is a very important part of the TAG grant, we have a polling question that we'd like to present and get some feedback from you. So could we have our polling question, please? Okay, so what we want to know is, does your organization know of a technical advisor who can perform this work? Yes or no? So we'll give you a minute or so to respond, and I'll give you a little warning when we're going to close the poll. So I think about 10 more seconds and we should be able to close the poll. So please go ahead and submit your response. Okay, let's close that poll and see the results. Wow, we have about 60% of people have an idea of a person that they could approach or hire for as a technical advisor, and about 40% don't know anybody yet. But never fear, because we have resources to help you with that. And one of those resources, I'm going to bring forth my colleague, Greg Neal, who will talk about the nuts and bolts of getting the community involved and what the eligibility and how to find out if you're eligible and all that really good information.
All right, thank you very much, Deborah. We've talked a little bit tonight about some of the possibilities and benefits of a technical assistance grant, but the primary purpose of the program is to help get communities involved in projects. Once there's a base understanding of the technical aspects of the project, we want to encourage public participation by reaching out to your community. We'd like to hear what the community thinks about the work that we're doing. You might say to yourself that you're a little uncomfortable working with large groups, or you're maybe not experienced in communicating with those large groups, but some of the technical assistance grant funds can be used to hire meeting facilitators. Meeting with the community to allow for questions and concerns to be raised is an excellent opportunity to engage your neighbors. As great as they are, though, not every community member has the time or the interest in participating in in-person meetings. So other methods of communication will help get your message out to the community. Next slide, please. Right. Who should apply for a technical assistance grant? Community groups that are 501c3 nonprofit organizations, or any group that has a 501c3 fiscal sponsor, are eligible. This 501c3 fiscal sponsor might be a larger regional community group that doesn't have specific representation in the community where the funds are granted, but is interested in supporting some smaller community groups. Tribal entities are also eligible, but don't have to meet the 501c3 status. As a reminder, the grant manager must live in the community where the funds are allocated. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, the grant manager must live in the community where the funds are allocated, but you might be wondering what communities are actually eligible. Well, we started with communities that are within 5 miles of an active DTSC cleanup project site. Currently, only existing DTSC cleanup sites are eligible, but as the grant moves along and as DTSC adds new cleanup sites, those potentially could also become eligible. But it does require that the project is under DTSC oversight. So this applies to basically states that are only within the state of, locations that are only within the state of California. The goal here is to provide those California communities immediately adjacent to our DTSC cleanup projects with the resources to understand the work that's being done in their communities. Then we use the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, or OEHA, CalEnviroScreen 4, to provide us some community information. If you're not familiar with CalEnviroScreen, we encourage you to visit the OEHA webpage yourself. They have a complete discussion of the procedures used to develop the scoring and percentile results. We are looking at CalEnviroScreen total percentiles of 75% above, which that means basically the top 25% of California's most burdened communities. If your community doesn't immediately meet that 75% total percentile, we've also taken a look at the CalEnviroScreen poverty individual indicator, and we are using the percentiles of 50% or above for that specific indicator. And all tribal communities are eligible regardless of your CalEnviroScreen. The full list of eligibility criteria are available on the DTSC Technical Assistance Grant website at www.dtsc.ca.gov/TAG or TAG. If your community doesn't meet any of those eligibility criteria that I mentioned, we still encourage you to apply for a technical assistance grant. You probably will just need to provide a little additional information about why you should be considered for a grant. Next slide, please. We've done a lot of talking about what a technical assistance grant's in and what the eligibility criteria are, but what does that really mean for you? We created a web tool that helps support identification of eligible projects. The tool helps identify the community total EnviroScreen and poverty indicator percentiles and where the active DTSC cleanup projects occur in the state. It's important to note that only one technical assistance grant will be awarded per DTSC cleanup site. So if multiple community groups are interested in the same site, we ask that you partner together, which will make your application just that much stronger. However, if there are multiple active DTSC projects in your community, you would be able to apply for more than one grant, one for each of the potential sites in your community. Now, we're going to roll the dice and do a short live demonstration of the Technical Assistance Grant Site Mapping Tool. When this presentation gets posted to the website, there will be a link to the tool included there. You can visit the DTSC Technical Assistance Grant website, and there'll be a link there. And it's also going to be posted, a link's going to be posted in the chat shortly. All right. All right, hopefully you are seeing the DTSC Technical Assistance Grant site mapping tool on your screen. When you first arrive at the webpage, you will be greeted with this welcome screen that provides the Technical Assistance Grant email address, as well as a link to the Spanish version of the same tool, just obviously in Spanish if that's your preference. This is a live map that you can pan and zoom at any level. These pink circles denote 5-mile radius around each of DTSC's currently eligible active projects. These eligibility areas were defined by first identifying the entire universe of active DTSC cleanup projects from our EnviroStore database. These are projects that we are currently actively working on, or that they might be done with investigation, but have a land use restriction or ongoing operation and maintenance requirements. Then we took each of those points and drew 5-mile circles around each of those points, each of the points represented in the EnviroStore database. Any of those circles that contained an eligible community meeting the Technical Assistance Grant guideline criteria became an eligible project. Keep in mind the purpose of this tool is specifically to identify eligible projects, so we cut right to the chase with respect to what's displayed. But the underlying information used to get to the final answer are also included in the tool, but are not visible initially. As a matter of fact, if you visit this layer button here, additional information can be toggled on, including all of the DTSC active cleanup sites, CalEnviroScreen total percentile areas, and CalEnviroScreen poverty percentile areas. For the purpose of today's presentation, I'm going to turn these off just because the map gets a little bit messy, and we will leave it to tag eligible zones and tag eligible sites. There's a couple of ways that you can peruse the information. The first one we're going to start is using the search bar up here in the upper left-hand corner. Today, we are going to use the City of Stockton City Hall address as our location of interest. You'll notice when you type an address into the search bar that the map automatically zooms to that location and provides you with a dark colored circle, which is a 5-mile radius around that particular address point. Over here on the right side in this information box, information about the CalEnviroScreen total percentile and poverty percentile will be presented. So when you click on them, it will give you the actual CalEnviroScreen total percentile, as well as a direct link that takes you to the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment website so that you can get some information, additional information on what exactly these percentiles mean. Same thing for the poverty percentile. It gives the exact percentile and then provides you with a link to OEHA's website. Additionally, there's a populated list of all of the tag eligible sites within 5 miles of that point. When you click on the box, each of those sites gets a pink box around it to help identify. All of the site names that occur in the list below occur within 5 miles of the site and are represented by one of these boxes. If you click on one of them, it will be highlighted in the map, and a little bit of information from the EnviroStore is presented, including a link to the EnviroStore database. So you can get additional information that's obviously not presented here in the web application. Additionally, if you don't happen to know the name of a project that you are interested in, you can just click on the map and a pop-up will occur with that same information, including the link to EnviroStore. If you are more of a map perusing type of person, you can clear all this information out and you can actually zoom and pan to any address that you would like. So you can zoom in and zoom till you get to your intersection or your residential address, and then you use the pointer tool here from over on the right and click on a building, and the map will zoom back out to ensure that you have that 5-mile radius. And then information, that same information that I mentioned before, is provided for that new location. During the question and answer period, we won't be performing site-specific evaluations, but if you have additional questions about this tool, we can answer them during that time. All right, we are going to stop sharing and go back to our presentation. All right, thank you. Now that we've got everyone all excited about the perspective of the technical assistance grant, you probably all want to know how we can get the process started. We will start taking applications shortly here in December. This will be done through DTSC's Flux portal, which we'll be able to access through our DTSC website once we start accepting applications. We'll continue accepting applications on a rolling basis until January 2025. The technical assistance grant is a limited time program, so the earlier you apply, the longer you will have to expend your funding. If you apply by the end of March 2024 and are awarded a grant, you'll have up to 36 months to spend your funding. Applications received and approved between April 2024 and January 2025 will have up to 24 months to use those funds. Next slide, please. So how would you apply for a technical assistance grant? Again, as I mentioned, we're accepting applications only through DTSC's OnFlux portal, which will be available on our website in December when the application period opens. Through that application process, we'll gather necessary information, including the site of interest, Calavirus screen, total percentiles, Calavirus poverty percentile, as well as other necessary information. Our grant guidelines are available on the DTSC Technical Assistance Grant website, which includes a complete list of eligibility information. Some of that eligibility information might include letters of community support, evidence of your 503(3) status, a list of tasks that you are proposing under the grant, some information to ensure that you have capacity to manage the grant, and how you will approach the community to ensure the objectives of the grant are fulfilled. Next slide, please. As part of the application process, applicants will need to develop a list of tasks to describe how you will use technical assistance grant funding if you're awarded, and a schedule of when those activities would occur. Here is a sample of some big picture tasks, budget, and timeline. Your application will have to be much more complete than this, but this is a general concept to give you the idea of where we're. Again, these are big picture tasks. Each one of these will have subtasks in it that will have their own potential budget and start. Next slide, please. As we mentioned earlier, the technical assistance grant is a reimbursement-based grant, meaning that once a task is completed, a request for reimbursement can be submitted to the department and processed for payment. However, we recognize that getting the program started is a significant part of the effort. So applicants can apply for advance payment for up to 25% of the total grant award prior to incurring those expenses. All of the required documentation and post-expense record keeping will still apply, but it will just get funds into the applicant's hands to get things started. If you have questions about the advance payment process, feel free to reach out to us via email at dtsc_tagprogram@dtsc.ca.ga. Next slide, please. Oh, thank you. I am now pleased to introduce Nicole Lane, Senior Program Associate with the Center for Creative Land Recycling, a California-based nonprofit that champions the equitable and sustainable reuse of contaminated properties. They are DTSC's partner in the development and implementation of the TAG grant program. Take it away, Nicole.
All right. Thank you, Greg. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So the Center for Creative Land Recycling, also known as CCLR or CCLR, has been working for 25 years to empower municipalities and community groups to repurpose vacant and contaminated lands because people deserve clean, healthy, and safe neighborhoods to live, work, and play. We've trained tens of thousands of practitioners through events, webinars, and one-on-one assistance, and brought in hundreds of millions of dollars to support community-led redevelopment. We are pleased to be working with DTSC on this new TAG program. I'm joined today by my colleague, Tamara Cardona-Merrick. The two of us will be available to answer questions about the program, discuss your eligibility, and walk you through the application process. Please note there our email address, which is tag@cclr.org, so that you can contact us with any questions. Next slide, please. So your most important takeaway from this slide is the link to the DTSC website, as that is where you'll get the most current information. And this includes the application guidelines, fact sheets, this webinar recording, the link to the map to identify a site, frequently asked questions, and more. So the webinar recording will be up within the next few days. We highly encourage you also to sign up for our email newsletter so you can receive updates about the program. Also, at the bottom, please note that there is the link to set up an appointment with CCLR. If you click on the link in the chat, which Vivian should be dropping there, it will show open appointments for a one-on-one call. You'll be able to choose between English or Spanish. You can also contact us directly at our email address, which is again tag@cclr.org. If all of the appointments are full, or maybe the available appointments are inconvenient for your schedule, then we can work with you one-on-one to figure out a time that works. And next slide, please. Again, so this is our email address, which is tag@cclr.org, as well as DTSC's email address to reach us with any questions you have. As we mentioned, the online application will open on or around December 20th, and applications will be accepted on a rolling basis. There at the bottom is the link to the TAG Experience Survey to collect your input on the grant program and application process. So we would really appreciate it if you could please take a moment to complete the survey, whether you decide to apply or not, so that we can gather your feedback. And again, that link will be clickable when the slides are uploaded to the DTSC website soon. And next slide, please. All right, so we can now take your questions. So please put your questions into the chat. We did receive a few already, which we will go over. And I invite Tracy, Deborah, Ed, Greg, Tamara's already here, as well as CCLR's Executive Director, Jean, to please join us online. And before we dive into those questions that I've seen, I want to go ahead and ask Tracy if we've received any questions on the Spanish channel, because we do have that channel simultaneously going. All right, I'm going to assume we don't have any questions over on that channel, but if so, Tracy will let us know. Okay, so let's go to the questions that we have already received. And one was, does the site need to be in a Cal Enviro screen area? And yes, all the eligible sites are within the mapping tool that Greg discussed. So that is your easiest way to determine if a site is eligible. Just go to that tool. The link to that was dropped into the chat, and it's very clear about which sites are eligible for the grant.
Yes, but I would like to add that if your community or the site of interest that you're interested, or if the site that you're interested is not currently part of the eligible list, we encourage you to apply anyways. Not every community is going to be not every community of need is going to be identified here. We did our best shot at it, but even if your site of interest or your community is not included there, feel free to submit an application and just provide a little bit of additional information about why you think your community is in need of a technical assistance.
Okay.
And also, if I could chime in here also. So the majority of sites will be in the mapping tool, but if you read the guidelines, there are some additional, I won't say exceptions, but additional conditions that would allow someone to be eligible to apply, such as climate change related conditions, sea level rise or wildfire, that kind of thing. So check out, the guidelines. You may be eligible to apply, even if you're not within 5 miles of a specific site.
And you also can reach out to us via email. All right, so next we have 2 questions about potential applicant eligibility. The first being, can a resource conservation district as a special district apply for the grant?
That's a great question. As part of this discussion, I want to bring on and introduce Patricia Ochoa, who is our leader effectively for the overall CVCI program. Patty, do you want to join in and try to respond to that?
Sure. And just before I respond, I just want to say thank you to everyone who joined us late tonight to learn more about the TAC program. We really appreciate you being here with us tonight. The short answer to that is right now, 501c3 organizations are the only ones that are eligible to apply, but we do encourage you to partner and look for other organizations in your area that do have a 501c3 status and partner with them and collaborate with them and apply together. So you could do that, and you can show that in your application, but currently only 501c3 organizations are eligible to apply.
Okay, thank you. And then the next one was, does the tribal community have to be federally recognized? It's a great question.
Patty, you want to take that one also?
No, it does not have to be federally recognized. So recognized and non-recognized tribes, federally non-recognized and non-recognized tribes can apply.
Okay, great. Okay, so next question is surrounding technical advisors. They asked, does the TA have to be an individual, or could the grant cover the hiring of a team of advisors? Very
good question. I'll go ahead and respond to that one. Indeed, the technical advisor can constitute a team. The only qualification of that, my response there, is that kind of the funding associated with the technical advisor needs to be described up front as part of the application itself and how it's going to be utilized. But yes, you can have multiple technical advisors under one.
Okay, thank you, Ed. All right, so next one is, somebody is curious about getting a contaminated site that is not in the mapping tool designated to the mapping tool. So how would they go about that?
Right, would you like to respond to that?
Yep, I will take that one. So as I mentioned before, the way that the sites were initially identified was taking all of those individual points that represent an entire site from EnviroStore. We drew a 5-mile circle around those sites. Any of those 5-mile circles that contained communities that met the Cal EnviroScreen criteria, those became eligible sites for technical assistance grants. However, we fully recognize that a point does not represent a very large site, and there may be portions of a site that are closer to communities that meet those Cal EnviroScreen eligibility requirements. So if you have a question about a specific site and why it's not included, or why, some questions like that, please feel free to reach out to our DTSC email address, DTSC_tag program, and let us know the specifics and the site name, and we will look into it. Maybe it was missed in the development of the program, or maybe there's something else that we can discuss. But big picture, even if we can't come to a common understanding, still it's fully acceptable for you to apply for a technical assistance grant and just provide whatever information you think is useful in helping us come to a award decision.
Thank you, Greg. Okay, so somebody said that they're concerned that the grant might be hard to use if 75% of it is reimbursed and only 25% is through advance pay upfront. How often will people be reimbursed?
Okay, I'll take that one. The advance pay is we're held by statute to only being able to provide 25% advance pay. That's on a state level. However, that being said, recall that most of these funds are hopefully going to be spent on funding a technical advisor. And in that situation, it's a matter of having the community group, by arrangement with the technical advisor, that the technical advisor gets paid once DTSC pays the actual grantee. So for instance, the grantee can submit an invoice to us, to DTSC, for the work that was done by the technical advisor, and having not yet paid the technical advisor, you can submit the invoice to the program for reimbursement, and then you can indeed pay the technical advisor after that. So it's a matter of arranging the cash flow to make it less burdensome.
Thank you, Ed. All right, so we have somebody joining us who is a TA themselves, and they want to know how can they offer their services as a TA to eligible awardees who do not already know of a TA?
Excellent question. And we're in the process of finalizing that connection process for the TAG program. By statute, we have limitations, as the legislature has put onto us, is to make this program independent of DTSC, meaning that we're not to really provide strong influence on who the community group selects as a technical advisor. So we need to keep a certain distance in that regard, but we also see the need to try to assist in making connections. So we're working on that currently. I'd say at this point in time, it would be useful to go ahead and contact CClear, and as the situation and the arrangements develop, CClear can assist in making that.
All right, great, thank you, Ed. All right, so somebody said that they have applied for DTSC's ECRG grant funding, and they are awaiting a decision on that early in the next year. Are they still eligible to apply, and would their application be different?
Excellent question. The application is definitely different. The limitation is that the entity that's applying for our TAG grants is not supposed to be an entity that's actually cleaning up a site. So that's outlined within our TAG guidelines for further detail. But either responsible parties that had either were responsible for putting the contamination in place, or a party that's actually cleaning up a site cannot be awarded a TAG grant.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, I think we've gotten to all the questions in the chat, so we can just go ahead and go through some questions that we had from this morning's webinars, because there might be something that maybe those listening haven't thought about, but it could be helpful for them. So somebody this morning asked if they need to identify the TA provider before applying for the grant.
Good question. The answer is no on that. It's obviously hard to be able to do that effort of finding the technical advisor without knowing you have the grant funds awarded yet. So bottom line there is that in the application, then basically an amount of money needs to be set aside by the applicant, by the grant applicant, to be able to fund a technical advisor. So kind of given that challenging chicken and the egg situation, we would suggest that the applicant work with CClear, and that we've identified CClear as our assistant, if you will, in terms of the application process, and to work with CClear to be able to work out the details of the budget for the technical advisor.
Okay, great. Let's see. We got about 5 minutes left, so if you have any questions, please be sure to put them in the chat. Let's see, what would be does anybody else from the team have an idea of what would be a very helpful question to go over from this morning? I feel like we've covered most of what was asked this morning. I'll again ask Tracy, make sure that there wasn't any questions in the Spanish channel that we're not aware of.
There are no questions on the Spanish channel.
Okay, sounds good.
You know, one thing I'd just like to say is, I think that we really emphasized this morning was the intent of legislation from Senate Bill 150 and the intent of the whole CVCI program is really to put this funding out into the communities themselves, the communities that need to establish this connection with the cleanups that are happening in their communities. So I just can't emphasize enough that that's the spirit of where the monies are intended to be spent.
We do have one more question, which is, can multiple community organizations apply for the same site? That's a great question.
Excellent question. The intent of the program is to have one tag grant associated per DTSC cleanup site. So what we've done is incorporate into the application process the need to issue a letter of intent to us that a specific group is going to be applying for a grant for a specific site. At that point, DTSC, that is us, will go ahead and broadcast out there the intent of a community group to apply for a grant. If there is another party that's interested in getting a grant, we encourage that the two organizations work together to apply for that single grant for a single DTSC type site. I think as Greg Neal pointed out earlier in our conversations, you know, that sort of collaboration can only make the process and stronger in terms of the application itself.
All right, and we've had 2 last-minute questions come in. The first was, can our group have more than one technical advisor, as in one for water and one for soil? And yes, you can have multiple technical advisors on the grant. There is not a limitation there. And then the second one is, should duration of funds align with duration of DTSC project?
That is a fantastic question. We haven't had that question yet. That is the intent. The intent is that the schedule should align with the cleanup process for our cleanup sites. So if a site is just at the very initial stages of the cleanup process, which means investigation of kind of the extent of contamination on the site, that's perhaps where the clock should start ticking, but it should be long enough to encounter the cleanup process itself in terms of evaluating cleanup methods. So yeah, that should be very much tied to the DTSC schedule.
Okay.
Great question.
The next one is, would it be best to be a...
Could I just chime in a little here also,
Yeah,
please?
go for it.
So it might not necessarily align with the time frame, because the community can come in at any point. I mean, a project may be at various points, not at the beginning necessarily. And if it's at the beginning, a grant ends at a certain time point, whether that site is cleaned up, whether it's done or not. And the other part is, if a site is near the middle or end of its process, you're still eligible to apply for a tag grant, because, you know, maybe there's some explanation to happen with what has been happening on the site up until now and what's going to happen in the future. There's still room for a technical advisor to help a community understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that clarification, Deborah. I didn't mean to imply that it has to be right at the beginning of the process at DTSC. It's wherever the DTSC process is at that time, and presumably to the end of the process. So even if a site has already been remediated, but there's still operation and maintenance, say there's groundwater monitoring at a site, or it has to go through the 5-year review process, the regulatory process, where a site is reviewed every 5 years for the remediation adequacy, then that's fine too. So, but I guess the point is, it should align with wherever DTSC is in the process at that point, to wherever the community group wants to see it through to the end of the grant cycle.
Okay, great. So we are at 7 o'clock, so I'll go ahead and just take these last two questions that we have here. Question is, would it be best to be assessed for a brownfield prior to this opportunity, or rather the cleanup related to this opportunity?
I would say if you can do both, just kind of like we just talked about. It depends on where the DTSC site is in the process. Our philosophy generally is the earlier engagement, the better, so that the community can get familiar with the site itself in terms of the extent of the contamination, and to be comfortable with the technical advisor in explaining what that contamination is all about. And therefore, they can be more familiar with what cleanup options are available that they can potentially influence for that site.
Okay, great. Okay, so next one, can funds be used to implement more sensitive testing strategies, such as the funding of better monitoring equipment? And in terms of better, they mean more sensitive monitoring equipment.
Kind of the answer is yes and no. If the monitoring equipment is incorporated into community science efforts, or the confirmation sampling, as Deborah and Greg talked about, yes, there's funding for sampling equipment and sampling analyses as part of that. So I would say yes, as if it supports community science or confirmation sampling.
Okay, awesome, thanks. Okay, so I was just kidding. One last question. Can funds be used to prevent migration of remaining contamination, such as improved BMPs at a site?
No. Good question. I think what we need to recall is kind of what the larger strategy and purpose of what the TAG program is, as compared to other aspects of the Cleanup in Vulnerable Communities initiative actually is. The spirit of the TAG program, once again, is to enhance the communication between the community and DTSC, between these vulnerable communities and DTSC. There are other elements of CVCI at some of those other programs that I talked very briefly about, those cleanup aspects that could be used potentially for that purpose. And one of the attendees mentioned the ECRG process, which is one of the grants for brownfield cleanups. The other is the Discovery and Enforcement Program, which as I think I mentioned, DTSC actually funds the initial investigations and potentially cleanups of sites that impact those vulnerable communities. So I would suggest that there are other elements out there available that could potentially support funding that you're talking about.
Okay, awesome. All right, so we're going to go ahead and close the webinar now. We thank the DTSC speakers, Tracy, Ed, Deborah, and Greg for sharing information, Vivian for chatting our resources, and of course our translators. Thank you everybody for taking the time to learn about TAG with us. Please be sure you share the information about the program widely with your networks so that more people know about this opportunity. We look forward to getting to know you and your community. When we close the webinar, you will immediately get asked to take a post-Zoom survey. We ask that you please take a minute to complete that. It's pretty quick and easy, and that will really help us better support you. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us via email or schedule an appointment with CClear to help you with grant application assistance. And all that information will be uploaded to DTSC's site along with the slides that we went over today and the recording of this meeting. So thank you, everybody, and I hope you have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you, everybody. We really appreciate your attendance.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Right.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.
But I'm going to just start quickly with those that have to do with eligibility. Two people asked related questions to just confirm who is eligible to apply. Can a local government or public agency apply for this program, and also our 501c4 is able to work with a 501c3.
I'll go ahead and jump in. I'm going to ask Patty Ochoa to be able to respond, please.
Thanks, Fred. So thank you for the question. So I want to answer, I also saw, Jean, that there was a couple questions about who can apply and eligibility. So I think it was 3 people that asked questions around this. So the short answer is right now, 501c3 nonprofits are the only ones that can apply for our grant, for a TAG grant. We did this primarily because one of the values of the program is very much centered around building capacity in communities so that community residents that are living near a facility can learn more about the cleanup process and be involved in cleanups. So a lot of our eligibility and who can apply was guided with this value in mind. But we do encourage, just because a 501c3 can apply, we do encourage within a community for groups to come together and form some kind of coordinated effort and work as a partner, like in partnering organizations or a collaborative fashion, to be involved in the process. So we do encourage that, but for who can apply for our grants would be 501c3 primarily. Local nonprofits at this time will not be able to apply.
Patty, if I could step back a minute, and if I could ask you to introduce yourself and what your role is in CVCI.
Sorry, thank you, Ed. And I just for introductions, my name is Patty Patricia Ochoa. I go by Patty, and I'm the branch chief for the Cleanup and Vulnerable Communities Initiative. So my job is I oversee under CVCI, like we mentioned, there's several other, I would say, efforts and programs that are aimed at trying to advance environmental equity and build more capacity within communities. So I'm the chief for that program. So I hope that answers that question. So I'll step back to see if there's a follow-up question to that, but
any other questions about eligibility? You can unmute yourself and ask. Otherwise, we will move to a couple of other questions. Livonne wanted to know what happens if community organizations have to compete with each other. Or if it goes back to whether more than one organization can claim a site.
So at this point, the way we structure the program is we only have one applicant or one tag, we call it a tag, will be awarded per site. So technically only one group will be given the funding to work on one site, and that's why we do encourage collaboration. What we do to try to reduce and minimize that competitiveness is as part of the application process, anyone that's interested in applying will have to submit to us a letter of intent, letting us know, here's my organization, here's the site, I'm interested in applying for a TAC grant. When we get that letter, we will do a public notice, meaning we will send out some kind of like newspaper noticing to that area so that other groups or organizations in that area are aware that someone is applying. And the hope of that is to get people to start talking, or groups to start talking who live or work in those areas and coordinate and collaborate with each other. So that's how we're trying to minimize competition, because we do believe in communities. It's important for community residents and groups to work together on these projects that we have. So that's kind of, again, centered on the value of tags. So that's how we're trying to reduce some of that, but it is only one applicant can apply for one site at a time.
If we have multiple sites within our 5-mile radius, can we apply with one of those sites and a partner organization apply with another one of those sites, and then we work together to support the community as a whole? Or would that reduce the chances of either one getting the grant because we're trying to do too much?
I think the question also goes to whether you can apply for multiple sites, as the same entity could apply for multiple sites. So maybe address that as well.
So, Kristen, in short, like what Jean said is you can have one organization apply for multiple sites, right? But eventually, if you have like 10 sites, we're going to ask, do you have capacity to carry on the site? So your application will dictate that, right? So we are going to look at that. But there are some communities that have multiple sites, and we just ask that there will be different applications for each site. And if you choose to coordinate with other groups about how to apply, that's fine. You guys can do that coordination. And it's fine.
Okay, thank you.
There's a lot of questions about the technical advisor, as we had anticipated. Kathy wanted to know about the qualifications of the TA. Yvonne wanted to know what are the restrictions of hiring a TA. Kristen had a lot of questions about the role of the TA. Bradley wants to know, can they hire a few TA advisors on the same project? So let's break that down, because those are really important questions, and we thank you for those. Why don't we just start with the qualifications of the TA and any restrictions on hiring one?
Very good. Thank you for that question. I'll go ahead and pick up the responses for the technical advisor. So, we struggled with that a bit, to be honest with you. We'd like to have the communities get the best technical advice they can get, right? But we, on the flip side of that, we also don't want to provide too many restrictions on that person. So we're asking, and it's pretty simply, that the person has the experience within the environmental realm to be able to sufficiently provide that advice. In terms of professional registrations and so forth, we're not requiring PG or a PE to be that advisor, but simply that they have the appropriate education and the background to be able to be a technical advisor. And really, almost more importantly, the communication and connection with the communities to be able to effectively communicate that information to the communities. Jean, next one.
Could I ask a follow-up question on that, if you don't mind?
Yeah, please.
Do you have a list of technical advisors that we could get on?
That is an excellent question. And that's another one of the questions that we're still kind of tweaking the knobs on doing and bringing up with. I mean, as was seen in the poll, about half of the organizations here have somebody in mind, but there are going to be communities that do not have that person or persons in mind. What we struggle with is the legislation, SB 158, that actually funds the TAG program, talks about independence of that technical advisor. And the way our read is on that definition is, if there's that organization is not supposed to have any connection with us. It's really meant to be a sort of neutral entity. So for us to go out there and recommend organization, that's something we can't do. So we're still working on how to get that list together, in a neutral fashion. But whether we connect technical advisors with communities or we connect communities with technical advisors, that's where we're kind of in the final throes of trying to get that. Good question.
We do hope, with meeting with your CClear support, that we could help you think through the qualifications based on the scope of work you'd want that technical advisor to do. So what are the academic and work experience qualifications that would best fit and make that person successful in working with your community, and how to find them. And we can provide you with a chart of qualifications so that you could have different advisors, complete that, so you could evaluate different advisor qualifications for the best fit. So it is a good question, and we are developing out materials that will help support you to understand the scope of work and to ensure the qualifications meet that scope successfully.
Very good, thank you. Okay,
we
Jean.
need to have our person selected before we apply for the grant.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the beginning of that.
We need to have our person selected before we apply for the grant.
No, you don't. And I think that's kind of the chicken and the egg situation. I think CClear will provide assistance with the applicants to be able to figure out what funding is required for that. but that can be done after.
And Kristen, you also asked a number of other questions. I can paraphrase them, and then if you want to jump in, you really wanted to explore what the role of the technical advisor is as it relates to potentially helping to create a cleanup plan, if they already know what the contamination is, and can they also help you identify funding to support the cleanup plan?
Another great question I'll respond to. I think with that question, we have to step back a bit about kind of what the purpose of the technical assistance grants program is versus that greater umbrella that we talked about, the Cleanup and Vulnerable Communities Initiative. TAG itself is meant for the engagement with the communities to act as a resource to better connect DTSC with the communities and to really enhance the trust. So it's meant to be able to be an engagement tool for the communities. Cleanup and Vulnerable Communities Initiative on a greater scale involve putting monies towards the actual cleanups of those communities in which implementation plans like you're talking about would be part of that. So like I mentioned earlier on, the vast amount of funding for CVCI is directed in that effort, well over $400 million. And there are two other programs within CVCI that kind of deal with that more directly. And one is the Equitable Communities Revitalization Grants, which provide direct cleanups for cleanup of brownfields. And there's a discovery and enforcement program. And that's meant to be able to have DTSC step in and actually go for, start the cleanup process and get those sites cleaned up. And if there's no responsible party for those cleanups, then the state will do that on their own. If there is a responsible party for it, then that is something that will engage that responsible party and compel them to do the cleanup. Backing up though, that's a long explanation, is that we call it D&E, Discovery and Enforcement, has a petition process to petition that certain sites be evaluated as part of that program. So hopefully that explanation of the overall CVCI would help.
I'm just going to expand on it briefly. The technical advisor can certainly review, if there is a cleanup plan, review the elements of that cleanup plan so that you understand it and the community is engaged in what that might mean for their community and any impact that may have on the community, and what health and safety procedures are being put in place to protect the community during the cleanup. That is definitely something the technical advisor could participate in. In terms of, as Ed was saying, for funding, CCLEAR can also advise on what funding is available, both through DTSC, the Equitable Community Revitalization Grant Program, but there may also be EPA funding available, and that is something that we could provide some assistance in as well.
That's also helpful. Thank you both.
Can you just explain, team, the voluntary cleanup? What does that mean for a local site? Just maybe just to,
Yes.
some of these are new definitions for many of us. So
I'll jump in on that one. DTSC's program, our overall cleanup program, involves two types of agreements, if you will. One is where the responsible party or proponent that wants to clean up a site comes to us voluntarily and requests our oversight so that cleanup is done in a responsible way in compliance with the regulations in place. The other is where the responsible party is not as cooperative. And that is where DTSC has the authority to issue orders for cleanups. So that when we talk about voluntary agreements, it's from the side where the responsible party or project proponent would come to us and voluntarily get an agreement with us, clean up a site.
If a site was contaminated way back during the gold rush, and so the current landowner wasn't necessarily responsible for putting all that cadmium there, what's the scoop on those types of sites?
There's a couple answers. Those do become, we call them response action sites. You'll see response action, and that's a DTSC term for cleanup site that we're overseeing. We have multiple sites, just like you're talking about, either for us in Southern California or Northern California. And if there's no responsible party for that, there are certain types of voluntary agreements that can be put in place to kind of work cooperatively with, say, the current landowner or with a government entity to be able to oversee that cleanup. If there's no responsible party whatsoever for that site, then that could be directed toward the state-funded cleanups. And the department has what's called its orphan site, which that if there's nobody available to clean it up, and it's not, say, cleaned up by over the federal government by US EPA under Superfund, then it falls into our lap, and the state itself will handle that. And that's what you call maybe a state Superfund.
If I might add to, I'm sorry. If I might add to that, Ed, a little bit, I think the purpose of the technical assistance grant is to provide communities with funding for projects that DTSC is currently working on. So as I mentioned, that we developed the eligibility site list based upon DTSC active sites, and then communities located within 5 miles of those sites. The technical assistance grant isn't designed for us to go out, or for communities to go out and find new sites for DTSC to work on. There are some other programs in the Cleanup in Vulnerable Communities initiative for that purpose. But the technical assistance grant is designed to support communities for projects that DTSC is already working on. As Ed mentioned, that concept of response action sites.
It's helpful, thank you. A couple of people have asked about being able to hire multiple technical advisors. Can you respond to that?
Another good question. Clearly, technical advisors will have their focus area of expertise, and many of them will. Some of them will be generalists. But we do not have a restriction against hiring multiple technical advisors, as long as that's within the scope and funding that was applied for.
And Sonia, I see you on the that your video. Do you want to unmute? You had a couple of interesting questions about the budget. If you want to ask that directly.
Thank you, Jane, and all of you that have presented today. I definitely appreciate it. But I think Ed just kind of answered my question. My question was about, the way I internalize or process like a TA, such as like a program manager, project manager in general. And so considering that's the scope and lens that I'm interpreting that type of work, because I've done that type of work a lot, as, in a private sector and even in, nonprofit world as well, is that there's, as a TA/program manager, there's different tasks for different people. And so I think he just mentioned, yes, you can have multiple people identify, like this person is doing this role, this person is doing that role, or an organization. You might also partner with what I'm considering as I'm processing this, still is in the preliminary stages, that you also may want to collaborate or partner with other entities or organizations that have this strong skill set or that strong, like, so, where we can use, UCSD, lab, and they're willing to, so if we can identify those, like within that budget, saying, this is how much we're scoping this magnitude of order for this effort, and considering that this role, the TA in general, but also will be having a team of people, not just one person. But I think you might have just answer that, but if not, that was my inquiry. Thank you.
I think that's a good response. I think we see it as a partnership of sorts, where the technical advisor is that mostly for providing the technical translation of the information, but we also have the room for a fiscal sponsor that really is maybe the more long-term established 501c3 to kind of provide them the grant management aspect of things and handling of the monies. But we also have, but the key point I think Greg mentioned was that the actual grant manager is intended to be somebody in the community. So it's all those entities sort of work together to be able to implement the grant.
So we're going to ask three last quick questions. What happens if sites are under different jurisdictions, waste management and water board? I think you've answered that, but just to make sure everyone's clear.
That's another really good question. At this point in time for the TAG program, we're focused on DTSC, active DTSC sites. And the constraint there really at this point is just kicking off the program. Yeah, getting out, kind of getting it fine-tuned, let's put it that way, where we already have an understanding of those types of sites, and we can really fine-tune the interaction with the technical advisors and so forth. In a later version of the TAG program, which we really hope there will be, and one will be on a permanent basis, we entirely envision being able to provide that support for other regulatory agencies, within that we delegate to in the state of California.
And briefly, if someone believes there should be a site on the list and it is not, is the best thing for them just to email you at the DTSC address?
I would say if there's, it looks like there's an error. I think I saw one of the messages in there saying, hey, it just doesn't have, the site doesn't have an EnviroScreen score on it, but it's one of our sites, an active one of our sites, then yeah, you go ahead and email us in that regard. But at this point in time, the site should be an active DTSC.
My question was different. May I jump in just to make sure?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory has a main site in Livermore. There's a Superfund cleanup, DTSC is part of it, and other DTSC activities, and that's on your map. Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory has a separate location, a separate site called Site 300 in Tracy, which has a separate listing on the national priorities list, has a DTSC RPM, just like the main site. They're the same bureaucratically speaking, but Site 300 Tracy is missing from your map. So my question is, what is the remedy? I did leave a message on the web, but is there something else, someone else I should be talking to, even hook you up with the DTSC RPM for the site?
Good question. I'm going to put it over to Greg Neal, who is our GIS expert on this. Greg.
Thank you very much. Specific to that project in particular, and to a lot of other projects in the state, the process, the spatial analysis process that we went through to identify the projects that became on the list was really defined by those points in the DTSC EnviroStore database. What point represents that site in the EnviroStore database? Then we drew a 5-mile circle around that point, and then identified whether or not there were Cal EnviroScreen communities occurring in that 5-mile radius that met our criteria. Recognizing that a point doesn't represent the totality of the work that we're doing, sites that are 7,000 acres in size and that sort of thing, we recognize that there are some challenges with that initial process. So if your site is not identified by the mapping tool, then number one, if you think it's a mistake, you can reach out to us and we will address it one-on-one, or you can still apply for a grant. The initial pass through are those communities that occur within our predefined eligible areas, but it's not the final answer. You can, as long as you provide some additional support, you may still be granted a.
Here's the wrinkle. These are two separate locations that are located 11 miles apart. We work and have board members and membership and staff in both cities, Livermore and Tracy. And so my question was, if that's an oversight because it's the main site and you put a Livermore site on there, but didn't show the Tracy site has the more complicated cleanup at this point, a much higher EnviroScreen. And also our goal in terms of community is to do bilingual outreach in Tracy that's completely lacking. So I'm left with the site not up there, possibly not on your map, possibly only because the other one is named the main site and the one in Tracy is named Site 300. They're both huge cleanup sites and geographically and bureaucratically somewhat separate.
Agreed. And for your particular case, feel free. I saw that you sent an email earlier this morning to address this. We have looked as a result of that email, but we'll continue that conversation, on a one-to-one basis. But I think the end answer for the entire meeting is that if it's not on the list, you're still fully. It's an option to apply regardless.
Thank you, Greg. Really appreciate it.
So can I chime in here for just a sec? I would encourage everybody to check out the actual guidelines as well for the TAG grant, because there are, I don't want to say exceptions, but there are other conditions that a community could qualify to apply for a TAG grant that are not necessarily attached to a specific site. So for example, climate change issues or wildfire issues, for example. So there are, so check out the guidelines, because you may fit and qualify for the TAG grant, even if your site doesn't appear on that map. The map is just a help tool. It's a tool to help you find, to know if you're within a site range or whatever. But there are some other conditions that might allow a community to apply for a grant.
Deborah, that's a great comment. I want to ask somebody from our team if you could drop maybe a link to the guidelines in the chat.
That is your most important resource, so definitely check out the guidelines. And again, both DTSC and CClear stand ready to support your answer any additional questions that may not get addressed during the course of this webinar, which has already gone a little over time, but the lively debate is excellent, and many of these questions will find their way into our frequently asked questions. Just one or two more. Just because I think it's important to clarify the applicant address and the location of the grant manager, and understanding what that aspect of the location in relation to the site, if you want to respond to that.
I think I'll ask Greg if he could chime in again on that. Maybe you could clarify that. That would be good.
I'm sorry, could you rephrase it?
Sure, that I guess the answer is that the applicant could be an organization that itself has an address that is not within the 5 miles, but as long as the grant manager lives within the 5 miles, and then they can show that they've done work in that community, they would be eligible. So the applicant themselves could have a different zip code than the site they're applying for, as long as they meet the other requirements.
Yes, the intention here is that the technical assistance grant is used by community members to enhance their community. So that's the goal of having a community member reside, or a grant manager reside in the community that potentially is affected by this DTSC activity. So that's where that's coming from. Obviously a community group, they may have offices that are somewhere else. That sort of challenge. We'll be able to overcome that. But just to rephrase over and over again, that we want communities to benefit from this, and we want people in those communities. We're not necessarily looking for external entities to come into communities and say, we're here to help you. We want those communities to be able to help themselves.
So I just want to remind you that the PowerPoint presentation, which did embed many links, as well as this recording, will be available on the DTSC website shortly. We are going to close this webinar now.